Dawn crept over the airfields on both sides of the border, pale and indifferent. The sky looked calm again, as if nothing violent had torn through it hours before. But the men who had flown that night carried the battle with them, etched into muscle memory and silence. At Fort Yen, Lieutenant Nguyen Van Hoa sat on an ammunition crate while mechanics inspected his MiG-21. Black scorch marks streaked the fuselage where a missile had passed too close. Around him, pilots spoke in low voices, replaying the fight again and again. They turned before we saw them. One pilot said, "That's impossible." Another replied, though his voice lacked conviction. In a dim operations room, officers crowded around radar maps and greased pencil boards. Ground controllers argued quietly, tracing lines that made no sense. The Americans were reacting too early. Too precisely. They are not blind anymore, an older commander finally said. They are hunting from far away. The words settled heavily in the room south in Thailand. Captain Hawk Miller stood on the tarmac, staring at his Phantom as crew chiefs worked through the damage. A jagged hole in the wing told him how close he had come to not coming back. Lieutenant Carter climbed down from the cockpit and removed his helmet, sweat-soaked and pale. "That radar saved us," Carter said. "But it painted a target on us too." Hawk nodded. He had felt it in the fight, the sense that the advantage could vanish in an instant. The missions continued. Day after day, Phantoms crossed into hostile airspace, their radars sweeping miles ahead, their pilots trusting instruments as much as their eyes. Each contact felt like a roll of dice. Sometimes the Americans struck first. Sometimes the MiGs burst out of nowhere, close and deadly. Hoa adapted. He learned to fly lower, to hide in terrain shadows, to strike only when the odds felt right. The sky became a place of patience instead of aggression. Speed alone was no longer enough. In one fierce engagement over the Red River, everything came together. American strike aircraft were vulnerable, fuel-heavy, slow to turn. Ground control urged the MiGs in. Hoa climbed hard, then leveled off beneath a broken cloud layer. Ahead of him, a phantom formation moved like steel birds in loose formation. Then the warning tone sounded, "They see us." He realized missiles flew. The sky filled with contrails and fire. A phantom exploded, breaking apart in a silent flash that left nothing but falling debris. Hoa lined up another target, but his fuel was low, his escape uncertain. For a split second, he hesitated. He broke away, diving toward the hills as radar warnings screamed behind him. Survival won over victory. Minutes later, the American formation pressed on. The bombers reached their target. When Hoa landed, the war felt older than it had that morning. Years later, long after the fighting ended, men like Hawk and Hoa would remember those moments differently but with the same weight. One would speak of technology and teamwork. The other of uncertainty and restraint. Both would remember friends who never came back. Radar had changed the sky, stretching the battlefield beyond sight. Yet fear, courage, and sacrifice remained unchanged, because no matter how far a pilot can see, war is still fought by human hands and paid for with human lives.
The sky no longer felt vast. It felt crowded, compressed into a violent arena where every second carried weight. Vapor trails crisscrossed in frantic patterns, fading only to be replaced by new scars carved by jets moving faster than instinct could follow. Fuel warnings blinked in cockpits, ignored as long as possible. Captain Harrington steadied his breathing as he rode into another firing position. Training took over where fear could not. Radar cues guided his eyes. His hands moved with automatic precision. A MiG flashed across his display too fast, then perfectly aligned. "Tong," he said quietly. The missile leapt away. A heartbeat later, the MiG erupted, a brief orange flower blooming against the blue before collapsing into falling fragments. Harrington exhaled, not in relief, but in resignation. There was no time to think about the men who had been in sight around him. The engagement fragmented into dozens of small, lethal encounters. American-built jets covered each other relentlessly, turning away just as another slid into position to fire. The doctrine was unforgiving and effective: never linger, never chase alone on the other side. Cohesion dissolved. MiG pilots found themselves isolated, radios filled with overlapping calls, some cut off mid-sentence. Commands from ground control came too late or not at all. The carefully planned mass attack collapsed into individual fights against an enemy that always seemed to have another jet waiting. Lieutenant Al-Khatib felt his aircraft shudder violently. Warning lights flared right across his panel. "I'm hit, hydraulics failing." He shouted. Static answered him. Smoke filled the cockpit, sharp and acrid. He fought the controls, trying to level out, trying to find open sky. Through the canopy, he saw another MiG spiral downward, trailing fire, its pilot ejecting too low. Al-Khatib pulled the handle. The canopy blasted away. The roar vanished. For a moment there was only silence and wind as the parachute snapped open above him. Below, the desert rushed upward, littered with dark plumes of smoke. Above, the battle continued without him, indifferent. The engagement stretched on, minute after brutal minute. Each pass thinned the MiG formations further. Pilots who had launched with confidence now focused only on escape, diving low, breaking away, abandoning the mission entirely. Bandits disengaging, a calm voice reported. Multiple kills confirmed. Harrington checked his fuel dangerously low. His jet was scarred, a warning light glowing where metal had been pierced. Still flying. Still alive. Return to base, came the order at last. One by one, the surviving jets turned homeward, engines throttled back, the sudden quiet almost unsettling. The sky behind them was empty now, save for drifting smoke and the fading echoes of combat on the ground. Crews watched the first aircraft land, counting them silently. Each touchdown brought a wave of sung cheers, shouts, the clatter of ladders, but also a sobering pause as gaps in the formation became undeniable. Helmets came off. Faces were pale, eyes distant. Harrington sat on the wing of his jet, staring at the horizon. Only then did the weight settle in. The numbers would be written later. 82 MiGs destroyed in barely 2 hours. Analysts would call it a turning point, a lesson in modern air warfare born from the final innovations of World War II. But none of that mattered in the moment. What mattered were the empty chairs in the briefing room. The voices that would never come back over the radio. The knowledge that survival had depended as much on luck as skill. That night, as the desert cooled and the wind carried away the lust smell of fuel and smoke, the pilots lay awake with the same thoughts on both sides of the battle. They had gone into the sky believing in machines, in numbers, in orders. They came back understanding something older and far more human. That courage does not silence fear, that victory does not erase loss, and that every war, no matter how advanced, is paid for in lives. That history will only ever count as numbers.